I'm recording my homily for the 26th Sunday of Ordinary Time in 2018. So last week in my homily, I felt uncomfortable giving it because I felt like in some ways I was kind of gossiping about, people in the church. I was talking about Pope Francis and just some of the circumstances around the scandal and those types of things. And my intent was not to say anything that hopefully I wouldn't say, in front of those particular people, but to give a sense or an understanding of why perhaps certain persons in the church are reacting the way they're reacting to the scandal. Okay, so that was my hope anyways. This week, my homily, I also feel uncomfortable giving it, not because of that, but because of the subject matter, because I'm just not very good at it. And so this week, one of the things I talked about was discipline. Not like parents disciplining their children, like punishing their children, but discipline, the internal discipline of being able to do what we know to be good, and the discipline of being able to avoid that which we know is bad, right? And so sometimes, like St. Paul says, I do the things that I know I shouldn't do. So it's building that Christian discipline to say, okay, that's bad, therefore my actions correspond to the fact that I know it's bad, so I don't do it. And then that which is good, I do. Okay, so I'm going to talk about discipline. And I'm not very good at it, that's why I'm hesitant to talk about it, but I need to proclaim the gospel, right? Whether I'm good at it or not. So on Saturday, I was hearing confessions in the church. Now, in the church, where I hear confessions, it's right by the front doors to the church, the room that I use. And the front doors to the church at St. Mary's are glass. They're just completely glass doors. Well, you know what happens when you have glass doors at some point. At some point, boom, birds hit them, right? They don't see the door, they fly right into the door. So Saturday morning, I just finished hearing confessions. I was the only one in there. I was just kind of waiting to see if anybody else came, and nobody was there. And sure enough, this robin, this bird comes and smashes right into the glass door, and it hit it hard. I mean, it was a thud. So I get up out of the confessional, I go over and I look, and sure enough, the bird's lying on the ground. And when I saw the bird, it's like, oh, that was a KO. This bird is gone, because the bird is on his back with his feet up in the air, and they're all kind of like curled up, and he's kind of twitching, and it was really sad. I felt really bad for the bird. I was telling some parishioners about this story afterwards, and they said, well, Father, the bird just wanted confession. Anyways, so I'm looking at the bird, and the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi is this week, and I when I saw the bird, that kind of came to mind. And so I thought, I'm gonna give the bird a little blessing, right? Now I don't do this very often, but I said I'm gonna give this bird a little blessing. Now this is not my spider blessing. Okay, my spider blessing is if I see a spider, I bless the spider and then I squash it, right? It's a funeral blessing. But I wasn't doing that with this bird. I legitimately felt like in the moment I wanted to just bless this bird with, I don't know what, just maybe healing, I don't know. But anyways, so I give a little blessing over the bird, right? Well, immediately right then, I got distracted because somebody came in the church. And so I stood up, I came back in the church just to see it, and they started talking with somebody, so they weren't necessarily looking for me. So I turned back around, and I look at the bird, and the bird's standing up. I mean, this bird just a second before was like convulsing on his back. And now the bird's standing up. Now, I'm not saying there was any miracle or anything, okay? That's not what I'm saying. But it was amazing. And I thought, wow, I should bless things more often. This is powerful. This is great. So, thinking about St. Francis of Assisi, right? His feast day is this week. Many people know him for his love for animals. Okay, but if that's all they think he is about, then they completely sell short that which he is about. See, Francis was one of these very unique individuals where he really could see the world the way God sees the world. He could see beauty, and I mean divine beauty. He could see God and God's creative genius, God's creative love in everything. And because of that, Francis of Assisi never went around walking around with fear, because he felt like everything was an expression of God's love. And so whether it was dealing with people or loving just the lowly, the poorest of the poor, or some drunk lying on the side of the road, or just seeing beauty in plants and animals, he could see it everywhere. And he had no fear because of that. And so whether he would go and confront the Sultan, right? He would want to bring Christianity to the Muslims, which would normally you'd lose your head for that, right? But he had no fear because of that love. Now, I want to use Francis, St. Francis of Assisi, as an example of Christian discipline, because he didn't start out life that way. You know, we often think, oh, he's just always been that way. Not at all. He was wealthy, he was greedy, he was self-centered, he was a partier, he was a narcissist, in all of these different ways. But there comes this point where God had to purify his heart, and Francis had to let him. And so this begins, if you will, for me, one of the key elements of growing in Christian discipline. Now, when we talk about discipline, Christian discipline, we're not talking about like discipline like for sports, okay? The sports discipline, again, is still kind of self-centered, even if it's just for the team or if it's for the self. It's like, I want to become better, I want to become the best, I want to win. It's rooted in competition. It's like, I want to be better than someone else, so I'm going to work harder than them. I'm going to become more proficient in the sport. Or even if it's just saying our team is going to become better. It's all rooted in this competition. It's adversarial in some ways. Now, there's elements to sports discipline that are also rooted in Christian discipline. And it's the one where one of the elements is to hold nothing back. And so when somebody does that in the sport, when they hold nothing back, they get good. They can get really good. They can become the best. But it's still kind of rooted in this self-centered way. Christian discipline, very different. The purification that happens is reminding oneself that I exist for the sake of the other. I exist for the sake of my brothers and sisters, and for God, for our Lord. And so then discipline takes on this completely other-centered element that it's not competition at all. It's the opposite of competition. It's everybody's part of this same team. We're all together in this. And so the desire to give of oneself completely is rooted in just complete love for everything and everyone around us. No competition. There's nothing competing there. We're not trying to be better than anybody. We're trying to pour ourselves out for everybody. And so in some sense, it's learning how to become the lowliest, right? It's learning how to become the lowliest. Now that doesn't mean the most incompetent or the most ignorant or the weakest or anything like that, but learning how to become the lowliest. I'm here for the sake of everyone else, right? So Francis did that. Now, one of the attributes of Francis, when he really began to feel God was working in his life, he goes into seclusion. He goes and he spends basically about a month where he just hides from everybody. There was this little outdoor chapel that was kind of falling apart, and he went and hid, and there was only like one person, there was only like 2 or 3 people who knew where he was for that entire month. And when he came out, he looked homeless. He hadn't shaved, he hadn't bathed, he hadn't done anything. He looked pretty ragged. But his heart was transformed. I mean, his heart was just glowing. But if you hear him describe what happened during that month, it was brutal. It was spiritual agony that he went through because of all the purification that had to happen. When he went back into town, everybody was like thinking he was nuts, and so they started throwing rocks at him and trying to get rid of him and making fun of him. But it was the radical level of purification that had to happen in his heart, so then he could do the things that he wanted to do as this newly born Christian, if you will. And so then he began to discover Christian discipline. So, talking about some of that, the ways in our life that we want to grow in discipline, what are our weaknesses? What are the things that pull us away from Jesus? You know, one of the things is getting at the heart of this first step in growing Christian discipline, and that is having silence. Having silence, and I don't just mean a lack of noise, but having time with Jesus. Now, let's talk about the lack of noise first. We do need silence in our lives. We do need time to meditate. We do need time to think, time to process our world. Because if we distract ourselves constantly, we don't go deeper. We stay superficial. Okay. Now, what are some of the things that we're doing in our culture today where we fill ourselves with noise, and so then we don't even have silence. We don't even have the lack of noise. Well, our phones, right? Do you find yourself using your phone too much? Do you find yourself looking at your phone frequently? Do you find yourself watching things on your phone, doing things on your phone? I fall into that category. It is a temptation for me. In fact, there's times I think maybe I should go back to a dumb phone rather than having a smartphone. Maybe that would be healthy for me to do that. I just do so many things on my phone now, though. My calendaring and my emails and texting and all these things. Those are excuses, but those are things that I do need to do, but then I do all kinds of other dumb things on my smartphone. Okay, but there's other people, it's not a temptation for them. They would be like, why would I spend hours on my phone? That's crazy, right? Not a temptation for them. And so that noise, that distraction is not an issue for them, whereas for us, it's more of an issue. And we have to call ourselves on it. How many times you see, in little ways, the destructive nature of that. So one of the attributes also of growing in Christian discipline is being able to see the destructive nature of that which is harming me. And when I can see that, then I have more willpower to say no to it, because I see how it's destroying. So when somebody is becoming antisocial because of their electronic devices, and the sooner they can see that, then they realize, I must stop because I can see now the destructive nature of it. So when we see kids who are disengaging because they're doing this, and they're around a whole group of people, but they're not engaging, there's a destructive nature to that. There's something being destroyed in our humanity because of that, right? Okay, much less our relationship with God. So, silence, having silence. I live alone. I know if I had TV, which I don't, but if I had TV, I would watch way too much of it because I live alone, because there would be because that's how I would escape the loneliness if there's times of loneliness, right? That's how I would escape. That's why I don't have a TV, because I know I would do that. I know there's people who they'll turn the TV on whenever they're home just as background noise, right? But in some ways it's an escape from that loneliness, so they create noise. But what we need is not noise, what we need is silence. And I'm not talking about just turning the TV off, because then the person's still lonely. But it's the silence to begin to form a deeper relationship with God. Because God is the one who's going to give us the grace to grow in strength and discipline. And that's what Francis discovered. He had to surrender everything over to him in order to be able to grow in that discipline. Christian discipline is not white-knuckling it. It's not, okay, this is going to be my plan and I'm going to do this and I'm going to make it happen. No. It's grace-powered. It's powered by God. Okay? Growing in silence. The computer, right? Computer, Facebook, all of these things. We have to be really mindful about how we're spending our time and whether or not we're creating enough silence. one of the ways you can look at this too is you say, I don't have to give up watching TV per se. I don't have to give up my phone per se to have silence, but I need some quality time. I need some silent time. I need some prayer time. There is no reason that any good Catholic, any good Christian shouldn't have at least an hour of quiet prayer time every single day. There really is no reason. We have the time, okay? We have 24 hours a day, therefore we have the time. No matter who we are, whether we're the Pope, President of the United States, or just a mom or a dad or a pastor, we have the time. 24 hours a day. And so making that, if you will, the goal, and so the first step in the discipline is saying, okay, Lord, help me to grow in discipline so that I can have the silence, so then I have the key to unlocking more discipline, more Christian discipline, your grace to that. And so I'd say the first thing to do is to pray for the discipline to have that quiet prayer time, that organized time every day. And then what you do is you say, I can't do any of those other noise things, my little escapes, whatever they are, until I've done my prayer time. So if it's for half an hour, you say, okay, my goal is half an hour. Okay, so I can't watch any TV until I've had my half an hour prayer time, my quiet time. I can't get on my phone until I've had my half hour of quiet time. Make that your condition. That's the first place you go for discipline. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the other aspects of discipline. Okay, so we often need external help to grow in discipline because the thing is we're weak. We're all weak. We all have weaknesses. And so when we identify those weaknesses, we say, I need some help, okay? What are some examples of that? Those of you who are married, your spouse is your team member. Your spouse is your partner in growing in holiness, right? And so be able to use that partnership to help you grow in holiness, to help you discipline. So you say, here's my goal. I cannot watch any TV until I've done my half hour of prayer. So you give your spouse permission to hold you accountable to that. And then that's also the first step of really growing in humility, because your spouse is going to be inspired by that. Even if they don't necessarily share your same goal, they're going to be inspired by that. And they say, okay, great, I'll hold you accountable. And so when they see you watching the football game on Monday night, you say, hey, did you do your half hour? It's like, oh, turn the TV off. Have your half hour of prayer time, right? So growing in that discipline, having external things to help you. If somebody's an alcoholic and they come home and the refrigerator is full of beer, they're going to fail because that's their weakness. And so one of the first steps for someone with a weakness is you create a safe environment where you're free from that near occasion of sin. And so when they come home, there's no alcohol in the house. They don't have that near occasion of sin right there waiting for them. Okay? So identifying that. So if somebody's weakness is spending hours and hours on the computer, then you remove the temptation so that you can't do that, or you create some accountability system with someone. We find the way. Okay? But we all have certain weaknesses, and we look for the ways to hold ourselves accountable to that. Okay. The external. But the external is not enough. The external is not enough, because Christian discipline, in the end, is trying to change our hearts. It's trying to change our hearts so that our heart desires then, like Francis, desires to go in 100%. It desires to do it, and it has then the strength to do it. So that's the internal. So if you have the external to help you get there, then the desire is to form the internal. Now, we know when that happens, right? Because that weakness becomes not so much as a weakness anymore, but it becomes a strength. Years ago, I remember there was a gentleman who, he had a massive stroke. They took him to the hospital. He died 3 times, but they brought him back. They resuscitated him. And And afterwards, I was talking to him. Now, he had been a very, very heavy smoker, and everything he tried just failed. He could never quit. His wife would nag him, just everything, all the programs he tried, he could never quit. After that stroke, he never smoked another cigarette. Never smoked another cigarette. So I asked him what had changed. What changed for him? And he said, when he was in the hospital, he just had this image in his mind of him abandoning his grandkids. So his grandkids had a very special bond with him. And because of his habit, he almost died. And he felt like he was abandoning his grandkids. And so it's his fault. He failed them. And so he realized at that moment that he couldn't do that. And so he stopped. Now, he didn't need a program after that. He didn't need his wife to cajole him. It was internal. He had formed the reasons, if you will, internally. He had developed the strength of that love, or the strength from the love for his grandkids had changed him. And he now had that discipline to say no. Now, what are some of the things that help us form that internal discipline? Again, something I already said, it's being able to see the destruction of what we're doing and how it's harming others. When we're talking about something bad, right? Trying to avoid something bad. When we see the harm done, it's like somebody who's driving drunk all the time. Well, they finally cause an accident and they hurt somebody. Then the light bulb goes on. It's like, I now see the destructive nature. And therefore, they don't necessarily need a program to change them because they see it, right? Prison does that to people sometimes, right? You have the external that reforms them, and then they leave prison, then it's internal. They don't need the prison environment anymore to help them change, okay? At the heart of all of this, though, it's being able to see with God's eyes. It's being able to see with God's eyes. I talked about this week, this wasn't on Sunday when I talked about this, but we had the Feast Day of the Guardian Angels yesterday. And I was talking about how the angels are messengers, right? That's what the word angel means. It means to be a messenger. And guardian angels are like personally assigned to us. They're like our own version of, no, this is a dumb example. It's like our own secret service, like these guys who follow us all over the place, right? Well, our guardian angels, yes, they're there to protect us, but they're there to convey to us messages of God's grace. And so when we talk about our conscience, so our conscience is what helps us make good decisions, right? Avoid the bad and choose the good. Our conscience is God's voice speaking to us and helping us. It doesn't control our will, but it helps us. Well, the angels are the ones, especially our guardian angels, are the ones who come and convey that message to us in our conscience. And then that becomes that internal strength to choose the good and avoid the bad. Right? So by forming that silence, we then can listen to that voice, the messages that are conveyed to us through our guardian angels, right? God's voice, God's grace. And then from that, we can continue to grow stronger by our conscience expanding. And our conscience, we listen to our conscience more and it becomes stronger, and we become stronger. One last thing I wanted to share just about, no, I'm not going to go there. But just one of my own little weaknesses. So when I'm really struggling with a very important decision, whether it's as a pastor or just as a Christian or, as a Catholic, I'm really struggling with a very, very big decision, and I don't know the answer, and I don't know what God wants. I don't know what the right answer is. I feel helpless. I feel trapped. You know what I do in those situations? I go check the baseball scores. That's what I do. Or I distract myself. I go check the news. I do anything except do what I should do for that thing that's weighing on my shoulders. What should I do? I should call someone who has more knowledge than me, who's wiser than myself, get ideas, right? Go sit down and have lunch with someone who can help me with that situation. I should bring it to Jesus. I should bring it to prayer. Immediately bring it to prayer and surrender it over to Jesus. I should spend time processing it. I could create a flow chart, whatever. Do those things to process this important decision. I don't do any of those. I escape. I go out the back door, right? I distract myself. And it doesn't work. It doesn't help. So that's my that's one of my many weaknesses. I know what I need to do, but now I need the Christian discipline. And so the first step for me is, now that I know that that's really a serious weakness and it hinders me, I need to realize, what is the destructive nature? I let people down. I let my staff down when I'm doing that. I let the people down with regards to the issue. I let God down because God wants to work in that situation. But I'm escaping, I'm running away. So what is the first step? It's coming in here. It's coming in here and surrendering it over to Jesus every single day. Every day, surrendering over to Jesus. Just letting him have it. Say, this is my weakness, Lord. Every day. Whatever my issue is, whatever my decisions I need to make today, I surrender them to you, Lord. But help me to surrender my desire to escape so that I don't do that. But to have that confidence and strength to be able to make the decisions I need to make. Okay, that was an example. Now, we all have weaknesses. First primary step, just like St. Francis of Assisi, we go into seclusion, not necessarily for a month, but maybe it's 30 minutes every day. We bring Jesus our weaknesses, we surrender them to him, and then he forms our hearts and he helps us to grow in that Christian discipline. All right. God bless you. Enjoy the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi on October 4th. That's on Thursday. And God bless.